Video lesson 4.1, the end of World War I and the results of total war. So total war is only one of the names that you guys know to call World War I. Also, the unnecessary war, the war to end all wars, the Great War. All of these are implying that World War I was a completely damaging war for very many people. So we're going to talk about the end of World War I. So the Eastern Front ends, of course, in 1917 when Russia withdraws from war. So no longer is fighting taking place in Russia between Russia and Germany because Russia surrendered. So Germany then could take all those troops that were fighting against Russia and focus them on the Western Front versus France and the UK. So then the U.S. joins the war also in 1917. So they have a refreshed army, they have a good economy. So now with the addition of U.S. forces on the Western Front with the side of the Allied powers on France and the UK, they completely pummel German forces and Germany surrenders. But both sides suffer great damages except for the United States. So they agree to an armistice, which means a ceasefire, which means no more shooting, no more bombing, no more firing. So this is the end of actual fighting, which is declared on November 11th, 1918 at 11:11 a.m. And again, that's why Veterans Day is November 11th. So the actual end of the war didn't come until May of 1919, so about 6 months later. Because the end of fighting occurred in 1918, some people consider that the end of war. We're going to talk about the official end of the war in a minute with the Treaty of Versailles. But first, just a little bit about the social impact, which I'm not going to go into too much detail because your Socratic seminar definitely showed me that you guys did good research and absorbed a lot of information about what social changes occurred because of the war. And we'll go into this in more detail in class as well. So first of all, because all the men were off at war, women had to run their household by themselves for 4 years, and so women were in the workforce and in the military, and the amount of these women surged. So before they had participated in the workforce in factories and for families that were poorer, but now even middle-class families, women were working. So they feel their equality more than ever, and one of the things that happens as a result of this is that they gain suffrage, and suffrage does not mean suffering, but instead it means the right to vote. So women gained suffrage in 1920 in America and 1928 in Great Britain. And they become a little bit more liberal because they feel their equality. So the flapper style of dress comes into play with women showing off their legs a little bit more, which was not socially appropriate before World War I. But in the 1920s, we see women drinking, women dancing, a little bit more in public. There's just a lot more equality between men and women. Another thing that happens socially is that veterans come home and many of them are shell-shocked. Now, shell-shock is sort of like PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder where they have flashbacks, except shell-shock is a neurotic disease. And it's based on this trauma, and instead of coming in waves like PTSD does, it's constant. So they pretty much can't live on their own. Even if they're alive and they're shell-shocked, and it comes from literally the shock waves of being bombed perpetually for these 4 years, or however long they were at war. They didn't have the proper protection to withstand the abuse of the new technology. And because so many men were lost during World War I, this is known as the lost generation. So there were very few men in Britain and France that came home from the war between the ages of 18 and 30. So that was another reason for women's equality. Many women were left to be widows and run their household by themselves, but also this is known as the lost generation. So also men who maybe came back from war, they weren't coming back to a world that they were used to, they were traumatized from war. So overall, just the men in this generation, if they came back alive, they were not mentally alive. So authors from this generation include Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, these men fought in World War I, and their life is very affected by this experience. And because of the new technology of World War I, the devastation, the damage, war is no longer seen as this glorious nationalist thing. It's scary, and it's real, and we don't want a war like this to happen again. So they need to decide how to make that happen, and how to punish countries appropriately for what they did. So they meet in France at a palace called Versailles, and that's why this treaty is called the Treaty of Versailles. So the last 5 letters of that word are silent, pretty much, so it's Versailles. So Germany, during World War I, had a Kaiser, which is a monarch, and the Kaiser Wilhelm, abdicates the throne. And so Ebert, a man with the last name of Ebert, becomes chancellor, and a new government is established. And they establish the Weimar Republic. So in German, you pronounce W's like V's. So the Weimar Republic is established. It's sort of like a democracy. So instead of a president, they have a chancellor. So Germany now has a chancellor named Ebert, and they are a republic. Austria-Hungary, as you can see in the map, is dissolved into several different Slavic countries. So we've got Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland is a brand new country, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland. These were all part of the Soviet Union, which in their surrender to Germany, they lost that land. Now Austria-Hungary had part of it, and so they gave Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Hungary split into 2 different countries, Romania also, and Yugoslavia. Now Yugo in Slavic languages means all, and Slavia, Slavic, so all the Slavic countries. This is what Gavrilo Princip and the Black Hand initially wanted out of out of murdering Franz Ferdinand. They wanted this Slavic nation, and so in the end, they got it. So, there are a few actual terms of the treaty, which we are going to discuss causes and effects in greater detail. 1. Germany has to take total blame for the entire war. This is known as the War Guilt Clause. So because Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Ottoman Empire, those empires no longer existed, Germany was left to take the blame for the entire Central Powers. 2. Germany has to pay $12.5 billion in war reparations to cover civilian damages. Now, the actual number that they said publicly is $33 billion. And they said this so that French and English public civilians would feel as if Germany was being adequately punished. So there was a 3rd class of war reparations that Germany did not actually have to pay, but in publications of what the treaty included, it was a $33 billion in total. 3. The Alsace-Lorraine region and the 6 million people who lived there and spoke German and French were given back to France. 4. The colonies were taken away and became mandates run by the League of Nations. So being mandates just means that the League of Nations has the right to decide basically the laws of the country, but they're basically colonies still, but of no one particular power. 5. The Allied Army, an Allied army, occupies the Rhineland, so that's that shaded orange area on the map we looked at before, and that's on the French and German border, but it's still part of Germany, for a period of 15 years. So this is in 1919. 1934 is the year that this expires. So no troops are allowed in the occupation zone by Germany. So only Allied troops, and they are occupying a part of Germany. Think about how this makes Germany feel. 6. The German army is to have no more than 100,000 men. Think about that number for a second. That's as much as died in one battle in World War I. And the Navy is limited to only 15,000 sailors and only 6 battleships. There's no Air Force, and they could not buy any additional war material. So these are the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and they are pretty harsh. Video lesson 4.2, Totalitarian Dictatorships and the Rise of Hitler. So that very long word that I just said is totalitarianism. And I suggest practicing saying it a few times because I'm not going to let you get away with not being able to pronounce it, just like the Treaty of Versailles. So, totalitarianism is simply a system of government in which a dictator or a leader has complete or total control over his country and the lives of his people. So basically, one person controls every single aspect of society, the government, and the economy. So there's only one party. So the ruling party is the only legal political party. Even though, for instance, in America, President Obama is a Democrat, the Republican Party has control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So there are many, many other political parties as well that are allowed to participate in government in the United States. And people are allowed to pretty much believe whatever they want. However, in a totalitarian government, there's only one legal political party. And it is a strict government that has control over all aspects of life: business, religion, art, advertising, education. Anything you can think of is controlled by the government. And they are known for their use of propaganda, which is basically advertisements with a political message, or any form of advertisements trying to convince people that's used from a government standpoint. Censorship, terror acts, and also secret police. So there might be police that break down your door in the middle of the night in a totalitarian government. People similar to the CIA, in that you might not know who's in the secret police, and they're kind of like spies on their own citizens. And because of all of these things, individuals have very few freedoms, but usually this causes a relatively stable time period in government because people are pretty much just afraid of their government and they have everything ruled for them, so there's little to debate about. So there's no freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of the press. Everything is controlled by the government. There are two types of totalitarianism. We're going to talk about one of them, each of them individually, and then what they have in common. So fascism is the first form, and this is pronounced fascism, so it's like F-A-S-H-I-S-M. It's an extreme form of nationalism. The nation is more important than the actual individual. But in turn, the individual represents the entire nation and controls the entire nation. So this individual has to be very charismatic. So he has to have a big personality, he has to be a good public speaker, and he has to inspire people. And one of the people who you probably recognize down below is Adolf Hitler. And we're going to watch a short clip in class, next class, of Hitler speaking publicly, and you'll see really how he was able to rile up the crowd and inspire people. Also, fascism emphasizes the different social classes. So while keeping capitalism and industrialization and all those things that they had, there's a little bit more government control over the people working in those things, but there is a rich class, there is a middle class, and there is a poor class. So the other type of totalitarianism is communism. And as you know, in communism there are no social classes or private property. And you can see our man down here is Joseph Stalin. He is the leader of Russia from 1922 forward. And he is the totalitarian leader that we are going to talk about in this unit, as well as in next unit. He's a very important man, and some people even say he was worse than Hitler. But he, behind his head in our bottom right picture there, is the Soviet Union flag. Remember, Russia from now on is known as the Soviet Union. And they are our one example of communism at this point in time. So there are no social classes or private property. The government controls all of that economic. They are also anti-religion. They thought that everybody should think that the state is more important than any god. So they're against religion. And the government controls every single aspect of the economy. So there are two types of totalitarianism, like I said, and both have are a dictatorship, so they require absolute obedience to the leader. They're anti-democracy, so these leaders are not democratically elected. And they are based in extreme militarism, so they glorify the military. That's why often you'll see all these leaders, Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, they're all often pictured in military uniform, even if they were not actually a part of the military. And they use propaganda to maintain their rule and their adoration of their people. So they wanted their people to love them all the time, so they just put up very convincing posters of themselves, and we're going to also look at a few of those examples in class. So between 1920 and 1950, there are several totalitarian leaders. In Italy, the first totalitarian leader is Benito Mussolini. He is known as El Duce, or the Duke, and he rules all the way up until 1943. Of course, we have Adolf Hitler, the Führer, from 1933 to 1945. Spain has a revolution, and they put in place a fascist leader by the name of Francisco Franco, and he is in place from 1939 to all the way up to 1975. In Japan, there is a dictator known as Tojo Hideki from 1941 to 1945. And in the Soviet Union, or the USSR, like I said, we have Joseph Stalin from 1929 to 1953.